Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome into the room with us. We are super excited to have you here at the National Training and Technical Assistance Center, where we are about to dive into conversation about systems of care in early childhood education. Next. One second, if I can get the slide to oscillate. Here we go with our IT. Okay, uh-oh. Excuse me, guys. All right, here we go. A disclaimer before we get started, and it's appropriate to talk about technology. Although we are funded by SAMHSA and we partner with SAMHSA, it doesn't necessarily mean that our viewpoint shared today represents SAMHSA. And session security, just like I had that glitch with my Zoom and my computer just now, in the event that we have any technical issues, we will end this webinar immediately and send you all a new link to utilize. On the screen, we have all of our thought partners that help us do the work here in TAC. Super excited, not just to partner with the folks on the screen, but to really go into our think tanks and think, what are some ways that we can continue the work that we're doing that's authentic and that meets the needs of our community? So we're just so excited to partner with the folks here on the screen. And so when we think about our whole purpose and our vision here at Intact, what are some of the things that are important to us? Well, one of the main things is about closing opportunity gaps and just really standing in the gap for young children, families, youth, all involved. And so that could be through individual consultation, peer learning exchanges, customized coaching, training academies, communities of practice, a digital digest that we just rolled out. And if folks are interested in absenteeism conversation, that's a new brief that we have out, podcasts, and so much more. So those are some of the things that we're committed to here at INTAG. If you can take a second right now and scan this QR code, we have our virtual summit coming up and we are calling for proposals and we want to hear from you. Our last conversation last Friday was so good, so rich, so relevant, and folks want to hear more about early childhood systems of care. And so now is the opportunity. We'll show the slide again at the end of our webinar, but we want to hear from you and our deadline is October 4th. So let's take an opportunity and continue this conversation. And so just so folks know, we're going to go over housekeeping. Everyone will receive a certificate of completion. This conversation today is going to be, it's recorded right now, so we'll make sure that we share it all to you all and provide the presentation if you're interested in that. We also have a Q&A button that we want you all to utilize at the bottom of our screen. Why? So we can keep the conversation going, so we can hear your thoughts, your questions, your ideas. We want engagement in the chat, but we also want to capture the questions and answers because when all this is done, we're going to create a resource brief. We're going to make sure that we highlight and uplift some of the things said and thought about today, but more importantly, share intentional resources to implement back in your state, your region, your territory, because we want to make sure this conversation doesn't end today and it continues. But without further ado, we're going to get right into it. I am Lisa Knight, your hostess with the mostest today, a research instructor at Georgetown University, but before all things, I'm a parent advocate. And LaToya, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is LaToya Desamore. I am the Education Program Manager here at WEDU PBS. We're located in Tampa, Florida. I also am a huge advocate for our early learning children. I also have 4 kids, and they all went through the system. I have 2 boys, so I know firsthand what it's like, some of those challenges for those early learning babies. So I'm excited to be here today.
We are so happy to have you here. I cannot wait to get into it. So before we go into our questions, because that's what the day is about, we're having a conversation. Before I ask LaToya some conversations, I want to just talk about our agenda and what we're going to be doing today together in our time. And so our goal is to make sure we increase our understanding of trauma and trauma-informed care regarding our infants and our young children. We will be talking about systems of care in early childhood education, but more importantly, we're exploring strategies to navigate these systems and really see what they look like and how do we close them and make them more efficient. So in the chat, I want to know who's in the room. Tell us what role you have in your program and also what state, region, or territory do you live in. I always want to know who I'm sharing space with. So let's see who's here. Oh, and I'm in Tampa, Florida as well. In Tampa, Florida as well, right with Latoya. So we want to hear from you all. Keep moving the bar. All right, there we go. All right. Very good. I see a lot of folks in different spaces in the chat. I love it. Oklahoma. Early Steps. Hey, Kathy. I used to work for Early Steps USF. I love it. Love it. All right. Hey, Ellie. Good afternoon, everybody. I love to see it. I love it. Very good. Sarah's from Indiana. We got Oregon. I love it. Love, love, love. North Carolina, Ohio. Very good. Very good. And so this is what it's about. We want to know who's in the room. We're in a community together and we're doing this work. So let's keep it going. So right now, as we keep engagement going and I figure out who I'm sharing my time with today, I want to know how you feel, y'all. I used to train and coach teachers on the pyramid model framework, and that's promoting social emotional competence, but I think it's important as adults. So in the chat, tell me how you feel. Are you at a 1, a 2, a 3, all of the above? Before I was at a 3 trying to figure out this tech. Then we started the webinar and we still had some tech, but now I'm at a 1. And so on the screen, we have this quote here from Dr. Walter Gilliam. And so for folks that do not know him, I mentioned this last week, one of my favorite researchers, and he led a groundbreaking case study in 2005 regarding disproportionate discipline and preschool expulsion, to be specific. And his research showed that Black children, particularly boys, are expelled at greater rates than their peers of all other ethnicities. And so he is also a champion for the health and wellness of folks providing the care, doing systems of care work. And he said, we can't talk about the health and well-being of young children without talking about the health and well-being of those who care for young children. So I just want to know how y'all are doing and feeling, because I genuinely care and it's very important to me. So I love it. 1, 2, and 3, Colombo. I love it because I get that way sometimes too. All right, Robin said happy Friday. Robin's at a 1. We got Michelle at a 2. All right, Dr. Coles is at a 1. I love it. And that's what it's about, making sure that we're checking in on ourselves as we do the work. And we'll talk about this a little bit more shortly, actually coming up. All right, let's see. Okay, so before we get started, y'all, I want to just set the context. This is a short animated film that I had the opportunity to co-create with the filmmaker and an illustrator from CARS, one of our thought partners at Intact. And it talks about my preschool journey advocating, because remember, y'all, I told y'all I'm an advocate first. So let's come together and journey with me as we talk about preschool expulsion really quickly. I never thought that my journey advocating for my son would bring me to this platform, but here I am, and I'm very grateful to be in this shared space. My name is Lisa, and my son is Christopher Jr., also known as CJ. Our story is about preschool suspensions and expulsions within our education system and parent advocacy. I share my story with you as both a parent and also a doctoral candidate researching this very topic. My son was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD. And while this was helpful, it was just the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to dig deeper and go beyond the diagnosis. The reality is that preschool expulsion isn't a problem solely linked to a child's behavior. It's directly linked to racism, bias, school policies, and staff burnout. So, in what ways do we see the whole child and consider the system and adults surrounding our children? At 9 months old, CJ attended a privately owned family childcare home, and by the age of 2, he was labeled a bully. His dad and I made the tough decision to withdraw him and move him to a high-quality center-based preschool. The first year was pretty good until the behavior calls occurred daily. I had no idea what this ride would be like, but it sure felt bumpy, frightening, and exhausting. As the calls continued, the school had ideas of what they thought was happening with CJ, whether it was potential speech and hearing loss because he didn't listen, benign seizures because he daydreamed, or developmental delays. And all of these presumptions were linked to his behavior. I followed up on every suggestion, but he passed every evaluation. As a parent, I grappled with the next phase in our journey because I was sitting in denial and fear. I remember the day like yesterday. We were at the soccer field. The coaches were giving clear instructions to the team, and CJ was prancing around like a teenage mutant ninja turtle. He struggled to focus and stand still. He was in his own little world, happy as can be. After the soccer game, we went to a local grocery store and I met a mom with her son who displayed similar characteristics as CJ. After an hour-long conversation, she recommended her neurologist. I made the appointment and he was evaluated. Soon after, CJ was diagnosed with ADHD. The diagnosis gave us answers and opened my eyes. I learned how to advocate by asking hard questions regarding bottom line policies and equity. According to the Office of Civil Rights data, boys are disproportionately disciplined the most, but Black boys are suspended and expelled 3 times more than their peers. When people ask me, what's the solution to end preschool suspension and expulsion? You know, it's such a multifaceted answer with more than one solution. I'd start with awareness, building capacity within our education systems, and the other piece is advocacy, making sure that we're advocating for our preschoolers and their families, normalizing feeling seen, heard, and a sense of belonging. Our amazing creative crew that just gave me the opportunity, y'all, just to uplift my lived experiences. And so when we talk about systems of care work, I wanted to share that video to kind of set the context to really talk about systems of care. Not only are we actually doing the work, we're a part of systems of care, y'all. And so I'm just so grateful that I can utilize this platform to share my story and have the conversation about systems and ways that we can strengthen the work that we're already doing. So I'll make sure that I share this link with everyone, and we hope that you can share it within your programs and your states as well, and just spark conversation. All right. We will be talking about trauma today. We can't talk about young children and systems of care without talking about trauma. And so, in the event that something comes up for you, take a break, do what you need to do to feel safe and centered. So let's just start and define trauma just to make sure that we're on the same page. And so trauma is a frightening situation that happens to young children and families, and it can be tough to deal with or cope with it, right? When we think of trauma, it can be divorce. It can be death of a loved one, death of a pet. It can be a natural disaster. It can be incarceration of a family member or a parent, domestic violence, a water crisis like Flint, Michigan. It can be preschool expulsion, where you keep getting pushed out strategically from all of these preschools, and a child and family feel like they just don't belong. So trauma can look very different. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we talk about trauma and its impact and what happens. But then when we think about it, why should we focus on children and trauma? And when we think about systems of care work, working directly with families, having relational warm handoffs, we have to recognize that the trauma impact has on the brain, developmentally, and what those things do to those healthy interactions. So just want to make sure that we're in a position where we are trauma aware and that we maintain that trauma attunement in the work that we do with our communities. And so, systems of care. Let's define systems of care. In our last conversation, someone put in the chat that systems of care is defined for youth and families, but we necessarily don't really talk about it for early childhood education. And so we are going to talk about that today. So by definition, systems of care is effective community-based services that supports children and youth and families that could be at risk for mental health and other challenges. It is a coordinated network. We are not working in silos when we do systems of care work. That means that we have meaningful partnerships partnerships with our families, youth, and folks in the community, but we're also responsive to the cultural and linguistic needs of the family. And we'll talk about that coming up shortly. But ultimately, our goal is to improve outcomes. And so in the work, when we look at the definition and we think about the actual tenets of it, what our core values are, they're the same across the board. Family driven, youth guided, strength and need based. What are the needs that need to be met? And what are we missing? When we look at our communities, when we look at our families, what are some of the things we're missing? Our community-based initiatives are supportive, adaptive, and relational. When we're working with families, have we taken the time out to really see what they're carrying, to see what they've experienced? Have they just relocated? Are they experiencing homelessness? Are they experiencing traumatic events right now in this moment? And if so, what are some ways that we can come in and close that gap? But more importantly, in the context of cultural and language, are we availing ourselves and are we building out our structure so that we represent and we meet the families that we're serving, right? Do we have communication where families can understand, feel seen and heard, right? What does that look like? So just making sure there's a cultural match, right? So in the chat, tell us what systems of care looks like in your state, region, territory, or program. Last week, we had our speaker coming from Head Start. And so her experiences were around governance and policy council, and her program is federally funded. But tell us right now in the chat what it looks like. We also had folks from early intervention, and we know that's Part C implementation, which looks different across the country. I know in DC, it's what, First Start. So tell us what you do in the chat and what that looks like, because we want to make sure that we're networking, we're having this conversation, and also seeing what's working in different communities. It's all right. Linda, you're right on time. Parent to parent. Awesome. Head Start, food pantries, childcare. Wonderful. I love it. I love it. Yeah, SOC is shaped around communities. That's right, Danny. Thank you for that. Okay. All right, very good. Community resource coordination, early steps. Kathy from Early Steps. I love it. I love it. And so just keep sharing in the chat because we want to make sure that we're having conversation while we're in community together. When we think of systems of care, and we're going to wrap this up before we get into our conversation with LaToya, but in systems of care work, we all deal with the same things, y'all, right? So systems of care is rooted in the same core values, but we also still grapple with sustainability issues, whether it could be funding, where it could be structure, where it could be staffing. We all have the same sustainability issues across the country. But one thing I know, the most important thing is that interagency collaboration, really making sure that we create community spaces, community partnerships, that we're utilizing our advisory boards and our advisory service committees to find more resources and form these coalitions to support our families. All systems of care should have a solid governance structure. All systems of care, we promote individualized opportunities and also opportunities in treatment in natural settings. Gone are the days where we're giving caregivers and parents extra work to do, going to all these different facilities, trying to get resources, trying to get support. We're really trying to work more comprehensively and making sure that we are a one hub in systems of care opposed to adding more burden to families. But also, we recognize in systems of care that there is a mental health stigma. And I'm a huge component is asking folks how they're doing and feeling is one entryway to having a conversation and building relationships. And we cannot do this work without those relationships being rooted in trust. So I wanted to share just some of our system of care core values, our definition before we hop into conversation. So we're going to hear from LaToya Desamore today. I'm super excited, but I'm going to let LaToya open up and tell us first about the work that she does and the program that she works, and then we're going to hop into our questions. Don't forget, y'all, we have our Q&A button, so if something comes up for you, we want you to utilize Q&A so we can answer some of these questions. So LaToya, tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, like I mentioned before, for those who may not have been on at the time, I am the Education Program Manager here at WEDU PBS. And, we service not just Hillsborough County here in Tampa, but actually 11 counties. throughout Florida. Those are the counties that we service. And, you know, when I was first hired here, I brought over almost 20 years of experience working in the public education system. And I would ask people, have they heard of WEDU? And honestly, a lot of people had not heard of WEDU. But then I said, oh, have you heard of PBS Kids? And they're like, yes, I've heard of PBS Kids. And so a lot of people knew about our shows. They knew about, you know, I mean, they would tell us, adults would say, this is my favorite show growing up, or my kids enjoy this show. But a lot of families didn't know that behind each of those shows is intentional, rich content designed to support systems of care and, you know, families overall and children. And so we've spent the last couple years building. Kudos to WEDU. They really took the initiative to build their education team. And so from that, we've been working with other systems of care, supporting them the best way that we can. And that's really what I do, is partner with organizations that are supporting, you know, early learning success for these kids. We have recently received a Ready to Learn grant provided by the U.S. Department of Education. And it is also funded with the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. And so with those funds, we're able to really kind of work with, you know, the Early Learning Coalition. And here in Tampa, we have Metropolitan Ministries, and some other nonprofit organizations that work directly with those families. And so we're able to use that grant to be able to work with them so that the kids, our babies, can be ready for success when they start school. And so that's basically what we do here at WEDU. We're working, our calendar is always busy working with nonprofits, but we wouldn't have it any other way. We love supporting our families.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Latoya. So I heard you talk about PBS being such an excellent resource, and I shared with everyone that we will be creating a resource brief, this learning capture. So we'll make sure that we have all these resources available for folks after our last conversation, which is going to be held next week. But before I get into my question, Latoya, I heard you mention Metropolitan Ministries. So share with the folks around the country that's not from Florida what Metropolitan Ministries is.
Okay, well, Metropolitan Ministries is uh, very known in our area. They have a location in Tampa, Florida, and they also have a location in Holiday, Florida. The location in Tampa, Florida also has a special school where students are able to attend this school, but the families at Metropolitan Ministries are able to, they're kind of in transition, and they live on site at Metropolitan Ministries. They're provided all of their meals and services that are right there in-house. And the students, like I said, go to the school that's right across the street, so they can just walk over to the school. And Metropolitan Ministries, you know, they do a lot in the community for our, you know, sometimes ignored populations. And they're boots on the ground, you know, feeding the community, feeding the homeless, providing resources for those families and those children. And we love Metropolitan Ministries here, and we've only recently started working with them as we built our team here at WEDU. And it's just such a pleasure because they're doing some amazing work in our area.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to make sure that folks knew we were talking about systems of care, even in the work that we're doing day to day in our community. I
Right.
heard you say ignored populations, and sometimes we discover that in our work. We discover populations that are marginalized, populations that are ignored, populations that are unheard and unseen and unvalued. And so that's why group boots on the ground in our work is so important. So thank you for that. We're going to start our questions, y'all. Remember, we have our Q&A chat available. So, Latoya, when we think of systems of care, I want you to tell us, what does systems of care mean when we talk about just supporting the overall development of young children, in your opinion?
You know, when I think of systems of care, you know, you nailed it when you did the little definition. It really is like just a coordinated network of organizations that are have the same goal in mind, and that's meeting the needs of these families and supporting these children. I think that sometimes there are some challenges that families face, and these networks have to work together to be able to kind of meet those challenges and kind of erase those. I know my son, I shared with you before, my son, he also went through some things when he was younger, and we were told he should not probably come back to this preschool anymore because he was extremely hyper. He had a really, really hard stutter as well, and so he had some behavioral issues, and I felt like embarrassed as a parent. And so I can really relate to a lot of things that families go through when they have children and they need these systems of care. And not just the feeling of embarrassment, but there's also like those financial constraints. Sometimes, when I was a teacher, and so we didn't make enough money to pay for certain services, but we made too much to qualify for certain services. And so we were kind of left out in terms of access to certain services for my son. And, sometimes it's hard to navigate through complex systems. There was lots of paperwork, lots of things that you have to fill out. And, as a new parent coming in, to this whole system of care and this support network, there was a lot to navigate. And so it's really important for me to just kind of research and try to find things on my own. Now, I love to research, but I know that not every family is able to do that. And so systems of care really do have to kind of work together to try to streamline that process. And knock down some of those barriers. Another one is language can also be a huge barrier. We're trying to work into the Hispanic population, and we wanted to make sure in our education team that we hired people who can relate. I may not speak Spanish, but we need to have someone when we're out in the field that can communicate comfortably with these families so that we can meet their needs and they feel like they can talk to us openly and not have that language barrier.
Listen, I was going to ask you, well, tell me what are some of the big challenges, but
Oh,
you
yeah.
put them out there. And I love that though, right? Because from your lived experiences and from your professional experiences, you wear multiple hats. And a lot of us on this call wear multiple hats. We literally are in it and we're doing the work. But I heard you mention your feelings of embarrassment. And this is why we did that check-in, because we're all going through different things. And it is so okay to say, you know what? I'm not feeling it today. This process has exhausted me. I'm carrying a whole bunch of trauma just from supporting the families. What are some ways that I can get around this fatigue that I'm experiencing? So I just appreciate you pausing to reflect on your feelings, because they are very important. And this is important in the work we do to stop and really assess ourselves to see how we're feeling as we push forward and do the work. But just thank you talking about the navigation and how difficult that can be. I heard you talking about streamlining processes and making sure that we close the language barrier gaps, that there are no gaps. I just appreciate that. So when we talk about service delivery versus systems of care, it could look different in different communities. It could be called different things. But tell me the difference from your perspective, if there is any, service delivery opposed to systems of care.
When I think of service delivery, I think of the what. I think of specifically what service is being provided. Like I mentioned before, both my sons, my oldest son had an IEP for his for speech, and then my other son, my youngest son, had an IEP for academics. And so when we think of the system delivery, the service delivery, that's the what, the service. And then you think of the system of care, it's like, okay, well, how are they going to get this service that they need to be successful? And I think they have to work together, because like when you think of systems of care, it's not just my son has speech and who's his speech therapist during the day, or my son is, I also used to teach gifted. So there's like a hill. So my son was on the other side of the hill. And so it's like, okay, he's going to get services at home. I mean, excuse me, in the school setting, but then when they come home, then what? And so I found myself having to like navigate and figure out what type of service is available for the whole child, not just the child at school, but when he gets home, because as a parent, I need to be able to support him as well. When he's at home, or, when we're out with family and he's stuttering and all of those different things, I need to be able to support, not just have him be supported in the classroom or in school, but in the outside space as well. And so when I think of service delivery and systems of care, I just feel like they should work together so
Mhm.
that we kind of help the whole child, not just in this one space, because, the kids aren't in school 24/7. They're home, and families really need to know how to support their children when they're not in a school setting.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you separating out the two, the what and the how, right? Because when we really look at our work and how it's different, how it differentiates, you're absolutely right. The what is needed, but how is the implementation going to look? So we're going to roll into data because it's right on time and it just makes sense. We can't do the work that we do without making decisions based off of the data we capture. But thinking about the work that you do, what kind of information do you use to make decisions when you all look at your data, your programming, and all those good things, but ways to improve the supports that we offer in systems of care?
Well, when we've built this team here at WEDU, before, one of the very first initiatives we needed to figure out is, what does the community need? Because what we were not going to do, and see, this is where it gets into, like, when you can put yourself in the shoes of the people you're serving, okay? So I know what it's like for somebody to tell me, this is what you're going to do, and they don't even know me. You've not been in my classroom. You do not know that Johnny can't do this or that. You don't know, but you're going to tell me what to do. And that's what we did not want to do as an education team. And so the first thing we did was reach out to USF Center to do a study. And so what they did was a survey that was for our county as well as the 11 other counties that we serve. We wanted to know, what did families need? Where was the support needed? And so that was a study that took quite a while, but we got the results back, and the results showed that a lot of families needed support with regulating those interpersonal skills, self-regulation. And so that was kind of like our guiding force into our program planning. And so it wasn't about, okay, what we think they want. It was them telling us, this is what we need. And so when we planned out our year for our events and whatnot, we made sure that we kept the information from that survey as the focal point of why we did what we did. And when we partner with organizations, we work with organizations who had a similar vision and mission as ours to meet the needs of these families. And when we do workshops and we do different events in the area, we always ask for their feedback. We ask, is this working? Is this something that was useful that you can, use in the future? And if it's not, they let us know and we tweak it. We don't just keep going down the wrong path. We really do value the input from the families that we serve. And I think that's really important because, we want our families to know that their voices matter. And so we're very intentional with our surveys and getting their feedback to make sure that we're not continuing to do something that's just not working.
I love that. And I'm gonna tell you why. I love it because I heard you talk about so many different things. You talked about your interagency collaboration with the University of South Florida here in Tampa, Florida, doing a survey, right? Not just you all saying this is what we know, this is what our data shows from previous counties or previous structures, but going to USF researchers saying, hey, what does the community say? So in the chat, if you don't mind, tell us what ways you're doing a needs assessment across your community. Whether you're mapping, you're doing a needs assessment, a parent survey, in the chat, just drop it in. I just want to hear what folks are doing across the country to figure out the needs of the community. I heard you even talk about elevating family voice, and that's one of our core values in system of care work. But I heard you release the power struggle, because once we elevate family voice and see what the needs are, and then we now bring families into the conversation, into the work as a valued equal partner, we're releasing the power struggle. Gone are the
Yes.
days where we're telling folks what they need to do because we think it's best. Because who are we? Right? So in the chat, y'all just share with us, what are some ways that y'all assess the community? Is it a family survey? Is it a parent survey? Is it a needs assessment? Are you mapping? Are you collaborating with your advisory boards or your governance councils to see what the needs are, and to really bring families into the conversation? So let's transition into trauma and the impact on our system work, right? So in your opinion, in the work that you're doing, Latoya, tell us, how does experiencing trauma affect the way that we help children?
Well, I feel like when you go through something, it changes you. And, like I said before, I was a gifted teacher for a long time. And sometimes you can forget because you're dealing with these super high achieving students. And, you go home or and your child is not that gifted child, that you're serving every day. And so you go through some different things. And I think trauma, just in general, just in life, trauma really increases your empathy and understanding. I feel like when you've been through something, then you kind of know what to avoid, and you can kind of help inform people about different practices or different things that they can experience, that they can try, that can work for them. I think you are also like aware of the triggers. So if I've gone through some things, and I know you might be going through some things, I can help you with some of those triggers, try to avoid those types of triggers. I know kind of what not to say, how to phrase this, because I know how I felt when someone spoke to me a certain way. You don't talk down to families. It's important that that they have a sense of self-worth and knowing that it's not their fault, with some of the traumas that they experience. And I think also having gone through certain things, I'm able to kind of build on that trauma and share resiliency with families too. Because, like I said, my son who had been through all of that, and that was like trauma in and of itself, going through all those
Yes.
systems.
Yes.
But he's 16 now. He's 16. He's talking about college. He runs track and it's amazing. And he said for the first time last week, my husband and I looked at each other and was like, oh wow. He said, I'm trying to get all A's this 9 weeks. And I was like, you go head on. And
Right.
so really being resilient with your kids, like I'm able to just speak life into families that are going through that. When we have our meetings and our workshops, I let parents know I'm kind of an open book. Hey, I've been there. I know what it's like. Because then that kind of breaks down that barrier, and it just really allows us to be advocates of support because we've been through those types of things.
Something about speaking life into families, especially the family that doesn't feel like they belong, especially the family that go home because they're scared they can't get services and there are gaps, especially the family that feels like, I don't even think they like me. So it's something about speaking life into folks. I just appreciate the nuggets of wisdom that you're dropping today, Latoya. And so I'm gonna keep it going. I'm gonna check out the chat too, because I also still want to keep that going. But when we also think about that too, what do you think we can do to make sure that our support systems are better for children with adverse childhood experiences?
I think it's important for like this is free. And so allowing your staff, allowing people who work in your network to attend, creating that space for them to do those types of trainings and workshops, and that don't cost any money a lot of times. This is free education, free resources. I think it's also important to partner with other integrated services that are in line with your same vision and mission and vision, so the load is a little lighter to lift. When we love working with our partners because we share the load, we share the responsibility. One of the organizations that we work with is the Dream Center. We just met them like a few weeks ago, so we're going to be starting to work with them. And we went over for a visit. They're located in Sarasota, and the Dream Center is an organization, a part of 9 other organizations in the state of Florida, where they take children who are met at the border, without any adults with them. They're by themselves, these minors. And so when we went and visited, one thing I loved about the Dream Center is that every system of care that you can think of was on site. So they did not have to go anywhere at all. No travel was necessary. These kids were getting exactly what they needed right where they were. And so I think it's important to streamline the process, um, to be able to support these children and not having families go here and there. I mean, I had when I had my children when they were young, you know, I had to go here for this and here for that, and it was just too much, you know, because sometimes families don't have vehicles, okay? And if they do, they might only have a couple dollars for gas, you know, and so running all around town to do this paperwork and do this and that, I think, you know, what some systems of care can do is really streamline that process and see if you can get, like, if you're working with another organization, see if they can come to you. One of the things that was noted in our survey results from Metropolitan Ministries that I spoke of earlier, they love that we came to them. The families live on site. Now, granted, we are not far from them. I could probably walk if I had my good walking shoes on, but
Mm-hmm.
why not go to them? The families are already there. After our
Yeah.
workshop, we did one a couple weeks ago, the families went upstairs and went to bed. You know, you don't have to worry about getting in your car and driving home. So just making it so that these families can partake in these resources without having to do all this extra legwork.
Lightening the load, right? Because the load is already heavy. The
It
load can be
is.
heavy on a regular day. Let's call a thing a thing. I appreciate you sharing about the Dream Center. I had no idea about that work, and I love how you said all systems of care was on site just to come in and protect and make these babies feel safe. Okay. I just can
Right.
imagine what that feels like to be at the border and you have no one there to represent you, to protect you, to advocate for you. I just can't imagine that. So I heard you talk about the Dream Center. I heard you uplift Metropolitan Ministries. Um, Tell me about ways that we can create strong systems of care, but how do we expand our services? What can we do around that?
You know, like I said, what we do here at WEDU is very unique and special, but what I will also say that, as I mentioned before, we have over 350 PBS stations, and I think a lot of people don't know that. And at a lot of these stations are education departments just like ours. And they've also received funding from the U.S. Department of Education to do this type of work. So I would encourage those who are in systems of care, if they want to expand, to reach out to your local, and we can maybe put this in the chat. The website is a very easy website. It's www.pbs.org/stations. So www.pbs.org/stations. And you from there will be able to see what station is in your area. Reach out to those stations and let them know what you're doing and find out what they're doing as well. Because we're part of a network where we talk about the different workshops that we do. How can we improve? We're always feeding off of each other. And I think, like I said before, a lot of people just, they don't know. A lot of systems don't know that there is this another organization that they can work with. And, you know, your local PBS station is one. If you want to be able to expand, you definitely want to reach out to them and see how they're getting involved with the systems of care in your area.
I appreciate you sharing that, y'all. And we're going to make sure that all this information again is sent out after we disconnect today. But that's what this is about. You know, a lot of times we have things happening in our reach and we have no idea about what that looks like, the possibility of expansion. And so thank you for sharing that. As we transition into suspensions and expulsion. Okay, we got a few more questions, but we can't talk about systems of care work without talking about our young children and what's happening in preschools, right? So tell me, what are some of the best ways, in your opinion, to prevent preschool suspension and expulsion? As a
I
parent,
think,
lived experience.
oh yeah, for sure. I think implementing, you know, a positive behavior support system. And, you know, I'm just gonna just say honestly, really like having that behavior system in place and having something uh structured in the way that because sometimes children need that type of structure, and you just can't have no, you know, the kids come in and they do whatever they want. So there needs to be some type of structure in the classroom, that builds repetition for those students. I think it's also important to provide the professional development whether it be free resources like this or allowing your staff to attend other types of professional development. I think that's important. I think it's also important to strengthen like family engagement because like I said, my son, he was diagnosed actually with ADHD when he was early on, and his teacher was amazing in terms of her support for me and including me and calling me not just to say he on the desk again, but she really called to celebrate all of his successes. So
Yeah.
when it was a partnership. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's important for preschools to have the partnership with their families, because if I never talk to you except when you call in to tell me that my child is running underneath the tables, that's a problem. And so I think it's important for those preschools to have that engagement with their families. And then also I think just creating those inclusive policies, whether that
Mm-hmm.
be in the beginning of the year, let's have something where we invite our families in and let's create some of these policies. Now, some you have to go with the state, obviously, but
Right.
let's create something together. Let
Yeah.
the families be a part of the discussion on creating some of these policies in the preschool, what
Yeah.
works best, you know what I mean? And so I think including those families is another component of making sure that we can prevent those preschool suspensions and expulsions.
Keep mentioning families, and it's something about inclusion. It's something about partnering. It's something about building trust. It's something about a warm handoff as we welcome families into our program. So I just appreciate you really centering this on families. We
Mhm.
cannot do this work without it, whether we're talking about preschool suspension and expulsions, or talking about housing, food insecurities, whatever that may be, mental health resources. We cannot not talk about family supports. I also want to uplift infant and early childhood mental health consultation. And I wish I knew about it when my son was in preschool, right?
Mhm.
Because when we look at that model, that's another way that we can look at minimizing preschool suspension and expulsion. So if we have any consultants on the line, that'd be great to drop it in the chat, because we just appreciate you and value you because you build capacity within early childhood systems. So when we think about the programming that y'all do at your station, Latoya, when you're developing your program for young children, families, preschool staff, and the community, what are some ways that you all promote social and emotional learning and becoming more trauma attuned?
Well, one of the things, or the biggest part of what we do, is we host a lot of workshops, not just for parents, but also for educators. We also do it for the children. We do like front facing with children activities as well. And some of our resources that we pull from is available to anyone, any system of care. We rely heavily on Sesame Workshop. If you're familiar with that, again, on Sesame Workshop, tons of workshops, webinars that you can attend. You can also get credit for those if you're trying to get your points for certification. When you're teaching preschool, you have to get those points, and you can get those because they're certificates that you can get in any topic in terms of social, emotional, and academic. All of that is right there provided for you free of cost. We also have PBS Learning Media. We do a lot of workshops. And so when we have these workshops with our educators, we are showing them the tools that they can use in their classroom. When we have these workshops with families, we're showing them tools that they can use, at home with their child. We are a really big believer of intergenerational learning. And when we did our last workshop, one of the feedback post that we received was that they love the fact that they could do this program or these activities with their child. And sometimes, programs are just for parents, and sometimes there's a place for that. And then sometimes it's just for kids. but we also like to highlight the component of working together and how powerful that is for families to be able to work with their children. And so we do our part with hosting all of those workshops for educators and parents and children, as well as other systems of care. And it's all free of charge. So, our whole saying here at PBS is we're paid for and supported by viewers like you. And we really are, because when we partner with our organizations, we don't ask for anything. We bring all of the materials, and that goes for any PBS across the country. So when you are working with, if you decide to work with another station where you're located, all of these resources are free. They're free. Our trainers come out for free. Sometimes, programs have to pay a trainer to come and host these workshops and pay thousands of dollars, and you don't have to do that with the services that we have. And so just keep that in mind, that everything we offer is free of charge for all those systems of care.
Awesome. I love that. I heard you uplift intergenerational learning. And when we think about resources for trauma-informed care, what are some helpful tools or resources for teachers and families to learn more about trauma-informed care and how to support children who've been through hard experiences?
Well, like I mentioned before, the resources are not just available for educators, they're available for parents too, parents and teachers, the PBS Learning Media, the Sesame Workshop. It is a grab bag of high quality, standard-based, expert examined resources that it's free. And so that is the starting spot. If you wanted to gather resources for the families that you serve, I would suggest you start there. If you can't contact, your local station, you can get right online after this webinar and go to Sesame Communities and PBS Learning. And this is really great hands-on resources that's available for you to implement day one.
Awesome. I love it. And thank you just for revisiting some of those resources because that's what this is about, resource sharing
Right.
and sharing knowledge. So as we wrap things up, I have a few more questions and then we're going to go to the Q&A chat because we want to hear from folks and we may open up the floor. So when we rethink trauma-informed care, how can we change the way we think about trauma-informed care to better support our children and families? And then what are some new ideas that we might make to strengthen our systems?
I think we have to understand that trauma looks different for everybody. And it can be from poverty, it can be from racism, it can be from violence. There's no one size fits all and everyone goes through the same thing. Trauma is different for everybody. As a teacher, I experienced trauma. Okay. I worked at a transformation school with kids throwing chairs. Honey, that was trauma for me, me ducking and dodging. And so adults also face trauma. And I think that we foster strong community and networks by working with other organizations and realizing that you're not by yourself. And when you work with other people, like I mentioned before, it lightens the load and you can work to kind of streamline some of those processes. I think just that's important for us to be able to support families, is being able to just recognize that it just looks different for everybody, and that you can work with other organizations to support your families, and you don't have to do it alone. I think also empowering families is important. I think that you know including them in the decision-making process really can make a difference in the outcome. We talked about outcomes in the beginning, and including them in that conversation really can, help change the outcome, letting those parents be a part of that discussion. And I think in terms of just new innovative ways. I mentioned before of not having families run all over town. Let's, again, streamline. That's the vocabulary word for today.
Streamline.
Streamlining and also providing training, not just for your educators.
Mm,
If you got a child on the school bus, you already know, okay?
mhm,
Your bus drivers need to be trained. Your custodial staff need to be trained. Anyone who has contact with that child should have some type of training that they have been exposed to so they can recognize and how to respond to kids who have these traumas. And I think that including them is very, very important, and it's going to yield a high return because it's not just teachers and educators who need this type of background training. And I think also leveraging technology because I think one innovative way to do some of the workshops and that we've done is making it virtual. We found through COVID that, a lot of people can use their phones, they can get on Zoom. And so not having families go to different places for workshops, but let's do something virtually. And we've done that before. We partnered with another organization and they actually did the whole program virtually. And it was an amazing turnout to see so many kids with their families, working together during this workshop. So I think just thinking out of the box, it doesn't always have to be face to face. So those are just some of the ways that I think that we can kind of be innovative in how we support our families.
I just appreciate that. I appreciate that. And what you say, streamline is our vocabulary word. I love it. And that's what we need to do with our work. And I just appreciate that. I want to come over here, y'all, because I want to hear from y'all. We have a few minutes together. I'm going to go to the Q&A and it says, are there links for some of the workshops trainings? And I know that you did mention, I did a stop share. Sorry, guys. I know that you mentioned that. We have that in the chat. Just want to make sure that we're uplifting these resources, y'all. And so let's see. I want to hear from y'all. We have a few minutes left. As I was going through the survey feedback from our conversation last week, people wanted to speak and share their experiences. So Jan has their hand raised. Jan, tell us what's on your mind. We want to hear from you. Unless that was an accident.
Okay, so I'm from the healthcare field, and it comes to my mind that perhaps the thought of universal precautions, in other words, there's the assumption that there may be some trauma. Instead of going, like, for example, in medicine, there could be the assumption, that somebody has, abnormal, right? Or a lab, or et cetera, et cetera. And so my thought would be, if we put that towards the children that we're working, that universal precautions, like just kind of assume that they've had trauma. And then when you can go and do some of those focused questions with regards to trauma, you've already had that mindset. So that's just the one thing I wanted to say.
Oh, Jan, we appreciate that, right? If we go in there with the presumption, like, hey,
Right.
we just need to go in with an open mind and say, hey, something could have happened. How do we enter that conversation, Jan? So I appreciate you just calling a thing, right? Going in and just wondering what are some ways that we can support this process and this family. Christina, did you want to share? Thank you, Jan. Or maybe Christina just came off from mute. Anyone else want to share? We have a few minutes left. We want to hear from y'all. Anyone else want to just share before we close out our time together today? No? Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. We do have the chat. We got a lot of feedback in the chat. I certainly appreciate that. I appreciate y'all for coming today. We have one more conversation that will be next week. Let me pull my slides back up, y'all. I am so proud of myself for getting through these slides today without having issues. All right, thumbs up, LaToya. Can you see the slides? All right, perfect. Because today, y'all, Zoom was zooming for me. We just thank you all for joining us again. As we shared, you all will receive a certificate of completion. This webinar is being recorded and we will make sure that it's shared out. And again, thank you. We'll share the presentation as well too for folks that are interested. We just appreciate the chat engagement, the conversation, the reflection, for y'all showing up. If you didn't get an opportunity, scan this QR code because we want to hear from you. you. We don't want early childhood to go unspoken. We want to keep this conversation. We want to keep the resource sharing going. And we want you all to come on our national stage and share with us what you're doing in your program. What have you done? What are some of the pitfalls or lessons learned? We want to hear from you and stay connected with us. Here's our website information. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, where we have a ton of resources at Intact that we want to share with y'all. Here's our contact information, website information, our flyer. And if you have any TA needs, here is the link. We want to make sure that you utilize that so we can stay in touch. And we're just so thankful for Sampson, the partnership. And we just appreciate y'all. It has been a good time today. We made it. We're on time. We started on time. We had a full house, good conversation. And I'm just grateful. What about you, LaToya? How you feeling?
I feel great. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited, y'all. I hope y'all enjoy y'all weekend, the rest of the day. Thank you, Joanne. You have been the best moderator today in the back, keeping us together. So we appreciate y'all. So have a wonderful day, weekend. Do something fun. Do something for you. And we just appreciate all that you do in systems of care work. And hopefully we'll see y'all next week. Next week is our last conversation. And we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.